The grand halls of the Zerin Palace were bathed in golden light, its towering crystal pillars reflecting the twin suns of Typhos Prime. The royal court was filled with dignitaries from across the stars, all gathered for a single purpose: the formation of an alliance that would decide the fate of their worlds. At the center of it all stood Princess Alara, daughter of King Zithar, ruler of the mighty Zerin Empire. She wore a gown woven with threads of silver, her deep violet skin glowing softly under the grand chandeliers. Her people were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, advanced, disciplined, and unchallenged in war. Yet even they now stood at the edge of destruction. Their enemy, the Vrock Hive, was relentless. A race of monstrous, insect-like creatures, they spread across the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in their path. The Zerin had fought them for decades, but the tide was turning. If the Empire stood alone, it would fall. To strengthen their forces, King Zithar had arranged a political marriage between Alara and High Warlord Korth, the brutal leader of the Dragon Dominion, a species of towering, war-hardened warriors. It was a logical decision. The Dragons had unmatched strength in battle, and with their help, the Zerin might stand a chance against the Vrock. But logic had no place in Alara's heart. She had never met Korth, yet she had heard the stories. He, through fear, crushed his enemies without mercy, and valued power above all else. She would not be a wife to such a man. She would be a prisoner. As she stood beside her father on the raised platform, her gaze shifted across the room. Among the many ambassadors stood a figure unlike any other. A human. Commander Ethan Carter stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. His people were new to the galactic stage, young, unpredictable, and often underestimated. Unlike the Zerin or the Dragons, humanity had no grand empire, no vast armies. Yet they had survived, fought against impossible odds, and even won battles they had no right to win. Alara had heard whispers of their defiance. They were stubborn, reckless, and sometimes foolish, but they were also something more: unbreakable. Her father had allowed them to attend this meeting, though he saw little value in their presence. The Zerin Empire did not respect weakness, and humanity, in its eyes, was fragile. The ceremony began. Alara stood silent as the High Warlord made his declaration of unity, his voice booming like a war drum. It was a speech of strength, of conquest, of the survival of the fittest. Then, it was her turn to speak. She hesitated. The words she was meant to say had been written for her, words of duty, of obedience, of honor. But as she looked at the faces around her, she realized something. This alliance was not about peace. It was about power. It was about survival at the cost of freedom. Her heart pounded. She did not want this. Before she could find her voice, a sudden explosion shook the palace. The ground trembled, and the sound of shattering glass filled the air. The guests screamed as the grand doors burst open, revealing a group of shadowy figures wielding weapons. Assassins. Alara barely had time to react before the first shot was fired. A royal guard stepped in front of her, taking the hit and collapsing at her feet. Chaos erupted as warriors from different factions drew their weapons, uncertain of who the enemy was. And then she felt a hand grab hers. "Come with me," a voice shouted. She turned to see Ethan Carter, his expression fierce yet controlled. He didn't wait for her response. He pulled her through the panicked crowd, moving with a speed and precision she had never seen. He wasn't just a diplomat. He was a soldier. They rushed through the corridors as blasts echoed behind them. "Who are they?" Alara asked, struggling to keep up. "Vrock spies," Ethan replied. "Your father doesn't want to see it, but the Hive has already infiltrated his empire." She was stunned. The Vrock were already here. Ethan pulled her into a side chamber, sealing the door behind them. His breathing was steady, his focus unwavering. "You're not safe here," he said. "That explosion wasn't random. They were aiming for you." Alara clenched her fists. If that was true, then this wasn't just about the alliance. It was about stopping her from influencing the future of the war. And suddenly, she realized something terrifying. The greatest threat to her empire might not be the Vrock. It might be her own father's pride. Ethan studied her expression. "Princess, if you don't want to go through with this alliance, you have to make a choice. Right now." Her heart pounded. A choice. For the first time in her life, she had one. And she wasn't sure if she was ready to take it. Alara's heart pounded as she stared at Commander Ethan Carter. His words echoed in her mind. "You have to make a choice. Right now." The palace walls shook with distant explosions. The air smelled of smoke and energy blasts. Outside the chamber, guards shouted orders, and heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The Vrock assassins were still out there. Alara had spent her whole life obeying orders. She had always done what was expected, what duty demanded. But something about Ethan's words felt different. He wasn't commanding her. He wasn't treating her like a princess, a symbol, or a bargaining tool. He was asking her to choose. She took a deep breath. "What do I do?" Ethan nodded. "Stay with me. I'll get you out of here." Alara hesitated. Leaving the palace would be seen as treason, but staying meant returning to the same fate, an arranged marriage, a life without control. Before she could speak, a loud crash shook the chamber. The door exploded inward, sending shards of metal across the room. Alara raised her arms to shield her face as 3 Vrock assassins stormed inside. They were terrifying. Tall, insect-like creatures with exoskeleton armor and glowing red eyes. Their bladed arms gleamed under the flickering lights. Ethan reacted instantly. He drew a sleek black weapon from his belt and fired 3 precise shots. The first assassin collapsed, a smoking hole in its chest. The second lunged, but Ethan ducked and slammed his fist into its throat, sending it crashing to the floor. The third assassin charged toward Alara. She gasped, stumbling back. The creature raised its blade to strike. And then Ethan was there. He grabbed the assassin's arm, twisted it, and fired a shot straight through its skull. The creature collapsed. Alara stared at Ethan, breathless. He had moved with the precision of a warrior, the confidence of someone who had been in danger before. This wasn't just a human diplomat. He was a fighter. He grabbed her hand. "No time to stare. Princess, move." She followed him out of the chamber, their boots pounding against the marble floors. The palace was in chaos. Guards were engaged in battle. Guests were running for safety. And smoke filled the air. They turned a corner and nearly collided with High Warlord Korth. His towering form blocked the hallway, his crimson eyes narrowing. His massive, armored body radiated fury. "Where do you think you're going, princess?" His deep voice was like thunder. Alara froze. Her betrothed. The warlord she was supposed to marry. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between them. "She's leaving." Korth let out a sharp laugh. "You think you can take her? You are nothing, human. A weakling from a dying world." Ethan didn't flinch. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." Korth's face twisted in rage. "She belongs to me." Alara clenched her fists. Something inside her snapped. "I belong to no one," she said. Korth turned to her, his expression dark. "Do not be foolish, Alara. Your duty is to your people, to your father, to me." She took a step forward, her voice steady. "My duty is to do what is right, and I will not be your prisoner." Korth growled, taking a step toward her. Ethan fired a warning shot near his feet. "Not another step, big guy." For a tense moment, no one moved. Korth's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't attack. He knew killing a human diplomat would start a war. Instead, he sneered. "Run, little princess, but there is nowhere in this galaxy where my warriors will not find you." Alara turned away from him. She had made her decision. "Let's go," she told Ethan. They sprinted down the corridor toward the docking bay. Ethan's ship, a sleek human transport vessel, was already warming up. A group of human soldiers were waiting. "Commander, what's the plan?" one of them asked. Ethan helped Alara onto the ship. "We get her out of here. Fast." As they took off, Alara looked out the window. Her father's empire, her home, was fading into the distance. For the first time in her life, she was free. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because now she wasn't just running from a marriage. She was running from the most powerful empire in the galaxy. And they would never stop hunting her. The stars stretched into bright lines as Ethan's ship, the Vanguard, jumped into hyperspace. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and strong. Alara sat near the viewport, her violet fingers gripping the armrests. For the first time in her life, she was leaving Zerane space as a fugitive. Her heart still pounded from the chaos of the palace. She had defied her father. She had rejected an arranged marriage. She had escaped with a human, the very species the Zerane Empire saw as weak. Beside her, Commander Ethan Carter checked the ship's systems. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The other human soldiers sat nearby, speaking in hushed tones. They had just stolen a princess from one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The consequences would be severe. Alara turned to Ethan. "Where are we going?" He glanced at her. "A safe zone. Human-controlled space." "Do you really think anywhere is safe now?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the nav screen, adjusting their course. Finally, he sighed. "Probably not. But I wasn't going to leave you behind." Alara studied him. The humans were different. Unlike the Zerane, who followed strict rules of honor and duty, humans made their own choices. They didn't just obey orders blindly. That was what made them dangerous. And yet, that was why she had trusted Ethan. Suddenly, a loud beeping sound filled the cockpit. One of the soldiers cursed. "We've got incoming." Alara turned to the screen. Several Zerane warships had appeared behind them, emerging from hyperspace like predators chasing prey. Her chest tightened. "They found us." Ethan's hands moved fast over the controls. "They must have placed a tracker on the ship before we left." The ship's warning alarms blared as the Zerane ships locked onto them. "Incoming fire," one of the soldiers shouted. Alara grabbed onto the seat as the ship shook violently. Bright energy blasts streaked past them, narrowly missing. Ethan's piloting skills were fast. He twisted the ship through the attacks, dodging them by inches. But the Zerane were not so easily outrun. A voice crackled over the ship's communicator. It was King Zithar. "Alara," her father's voice was deep, commanding. "This foolishness ends now. Surrender, and I will show mercy." Alara's hands clenched into fists. Mercy. She knew what that meant. If she returned, she would be locked away, forced to marry Warlord Korth, and stripped of any choice. Ethan muttered, "Yeah, not happening." Alara took a deep breath and leaned forward. "I will not return, father." There was silence on the other end. Then the king's voice turned cold. "Then you are no longer my daughter." The words hit her like a blade. Even though she had expected it, hearing it still hurt. Ethan gave her a quick glance but said nothing. Instead, he focused on survival. "We need to lose them," he told his crew. One of the soldiers shouted, "We can't outgun them, but if we reach the asteroid belt near Orion's rift, we might be able to shake them." Ethan nodded. "Hold on." The ship accelerated, heading toward a massive field of jagged asteroids. The Zerane warships followed, their cannons firing relentlessly. The Vanguard spun and weaved between the giant rocks, dodging both enemy fire and deadly collisions. The crew held their breath as Ethan made a sharp dive, skimming dangerously close to an asteroid's surface. The Zerane ships followed, but they were too large to maneuver as quickly. Alara watched as one of the warships clipped an asteroid, its hull breaking apart before exploding into a fireball. 1 down, 2 to go. Ethan didn't stop. He twisted the ship into a narrow canyon within a massive asteroid, forcing the remaining ships to slow down. Then he activated the cloaking system. The Vanguard disappeared from sight. The Zerine ships hesitated, scanning for them, but the asteroid belt was filled with radiation, making tracking difficult. After a few minutes, they turned away and left. The moment they were gone, the crew let out a breath of relief. Ethan slumped back in his seat. That was too close. Alara exhaled, trying to calm her racing heart. She had escaped for now, but she knew her father would never stop hunting her. She looked at Ethan. "Thank you." He gave her a small smirk. "Hey, I wasn't about to let you get dragged back to that oversized warlord." She allowed herself a small smile. Then she turned serious. "We need to warn your leaders. The Vrak are planning something. And if my father refuses to see it, your people might be the only ones who can stop them." Ethan nodded. "Then we head to Earth." Alara looked out the viewport, watching the stars. She had lost everything: her home, her family, even her place in the Empire. But for the first time in her life, she was free to fight for what she believed in. And she would not stop until the galaxy was no longer ruled by fear. The Vanguard cruised through deep space, its engines humming steadily as it approached human-controlled territory. Alara sat near the viewport, watching the distant glow of Earth grow larger with every passing minute. She had heard stories of humanity's homeworld, a planet of endless oceans, vast mountains, and skies filled with storms. Unlike the Zerine Empire, where cities of crystal and metal covered entire worlds, Earth was still wild in many places. It was a planet of survivors. And now, she was about to see it with her own eyes. Ethan sat beside her in the cockpit, adjusting their trajectory. "You okay?" he asked. Alara hesitated before nodding. "I will be." She had left everything behind: her home, her people, even her father's trust. She was an exile now, a traitor to the Zerine Empire. But deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. Because if the Vrak Hive was truly preparing for war, the galaxy needed more than politics and arranged marriages. It needed fighters. It needed people who would stand against destruction, no matter the cost. The communicator crackled, pulling her from her thoughts. A deep voice came through the speakers. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering United Earth space. Identify yourselves immediately." Ethan leaned forward, pressing a button. "This is Commander Ethan Carter of the Vanguard, Riku." The Zerine ships hesitated, scanning for them. But the asteroid belt was filled with radiation, making tracking difficult. After a few minutes, they turned away and left. The moment they were gone, the crew let out a breath of relief. Ethan slumped back in his seat. That was too close. Alara exhaled, trying to calm her racing heart. She had escaped for now, but she knew her father would never stop hunting her. She looked at Ethan. "Thank you." He gave her a small smirk. "Hey, I wasn't about to let you get dragged back to that oversized warlord." She allowed herself a small smile. Then she turned serious. "We need to warn your leaders. The Vrak are planning something. And if my father refuses to see it, your people might be the only ones who can stop them." Ethan nodded. "Then we head to Earth." Alara looked out the viewport, watching the stars zesting clearance to land. "We have critical information for High Command." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, more cautious this time. "Commander Carter, you've been missing for days. We thought the Zerine captured you." Ethan smirked. "They almost did, but I brought back something important." He glanced at Alara. "Prepare for docking, and tell the Admiral we need an emergency meeting." The communicator clicked off, and Alara exhaled. This was it. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, shaking slightly as it entered the planet's gravity. Clouds swirled past the viewport, revealing a sprawling city below. A massive military base built into the cliffs overlooking the ocean. Ships hovered above the landing platforms. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, and watchtowers scanned the sky. Alara had never seen a human city before. It wasn't like the Zeren's polished and elegant architecture. It was rugged, practical, built for war. And right now, that was exactly what they needed. The Vanguard landed with a soft hiss, and the ramp lowered. Alara followed Ethan out of the ship, stepping onto the cold metal platform. Immediately, a group of armed human soldiers surrounded them, their rifles raised. A tall man in a dark military uniform stepped forward. His face was weathered with years of battle, his eyes sharp. This was Admiral Jonathan Reeves, one of the most powerful leaders in the United Earth Defense Force. He crossed his arms. "Carter, you better have a good reason for showing up with a Zeren princess." Ethan gave a casual salute. "Good to see you too, sir." "And yeah, I do. We need to talk. Now." The Admiral studied Alara for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me." The meeting. Inside the base, they entered a war room filled with holographic maps, military personnel, and strategy tables. The atmosphere was tense. The Admiral sat at the head of the table. Ethan stood beside him, while Alara remained near the center, feeling the weight of dozens of human eyes watching her. She took a breath and stepped forward. "Your Excellency, I know my presence here is unexpected, but I come with a warning." The room remained silent. She continued, "The Vrak Hive is growing stronger. Their forces are expanding faster than the Zeren Empire realizes. My father refuses to see the truth. He believes the Vrak can still be stopped with our military alone. But that is a mistake." She glanced around the room, meeting the gazes of the human officers. "If the Zeren fall, humanity will be next." Murmurs filled the room. The humans knew of the Vrak, but hearing this warning from a Zeren princess was something else entirely. Admiral Reeves leaned forward. "And why should we trust you? Your empire has never treated humanity as equals." Alara met his gaze. "Because I had a choice, and I chose to stand against my father's mistakes. I chose to come here to warn you." Ethan nodded. "She's telling the truth. I saw it myself. The Vrak are already infiltrating Zeren space. If we don't act fast, we'll be fighting this war alone." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled. "If what you're saying is true, we need to prepare." He turned to his officers. "Mobilize the fleet. Begin defensive protocols." Then he looked back at Alara. "And what about you, Princess? What do you want?" Alara straightened her shoulders. "I want to fight." Some of the officers raised their eyebrows. "I know my people's technology, our strategies, our weaknesses. I can help you. I won't sit back and watch the Vrak destroy everything." The Admiral studied her carefully. Then a small, approving smile appeared. "Then welcome to the Resistance. A new path." That night, Alara stood on the base's balcony, staring at the endless ocean. The waves crashed against the cliffs, wild and untamed, just like humanity. Ethan joined her, hands in his pockets. "So, how does it feel? You're officially a traitor to your own empire." Alara smirked. "Strangely, it feels right." Ethan chuckled. "Good, because things are about to get a whole lot harder." She glanced at him. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Above them, the stars shimmered. Somewhere out there, the Vrak were preparing for war. And this time, Alara would be fighting back. The next morning, the United Earth Defense Force base was alive with movement. Soldiers marched across the training grounds. Engineers worked on repairing battle-damaged ships, and officers shouted orders. The air smelled of metal, fuel, and determination. Alara stood in the middle of it all, dressed in human military gear instead of her royal Zeren robes. The uniform felt strange on her, lighter than Zeren armor, but more flexible. It wasn't designed for ceremony. It was designed for survival. Ethan approached, carrying 2 training swords. "Ready for your first lesson in human combat?" he asked with a smirk. Alara raised an eyebrow. "I've trained with Zeren warriors since childhood. This will be easy." Ethan tossed her a sword. She caught it effortlessly, spinning it in her hands with expert precision. A few human soldiers nearby whistled in admiration. Ethan grinned. "Let's see if you can back that up." The two stepped into the sparring ring, surrounded by a growing crowd of onlookers. Humans weren't often allowed to spar with Zarin warriors. This would be interesting. Ethan moved first, swinging his sword in a quick, fluid motion. Alara dodged easily, her movements sharp and controlled. She countered with a fast strike, but Ethan blocked it just in time. The sound of clashing metal filled the air as they exchanged blows. Strike, block, counter, dodge. Alara was fast, but Ethan was unpredictable. Unlike Zarin combat, which followed structured techniques, human fighting was wild and adaptive. Ethan suddenly stepped in close, using his body weight to unbalance her. Alara stumbled, and in that split second, he knocked the sword from her hands. The crowd cheered as Ethan pointed his blade at her chest. "Lesson 1, he said, breathing hard. Humans fight dirty." Alara stared at him. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. "Good," she said, "because the Vrak don't fight fair either." Ethan offered his hand, and she took it, pulling herself up. The watching soldiers exchanged impressed looks. She wasn't just a runaway princess, she was a warrior. Admiral Reeves, who had been observing from a distance, nodded approvingly. "She's going to fit in just fine." Preparing for the enemy. For the next few days, Alara trained alongside human soldiers. She learned their tactics, their technology, and their strange but effective way of thinking. At the same time, she taught them about the Zarin, how their ships worked, their combat techniques, and most importantly, their weaknesses. If the humans were going to survive, they needed every advantage. One evening, Alara sat with Ethan and his squad around a holographic map of the galaxy. They were studying the Vrak invasion patterns. "They're spreading faster than we thought," one soldier muttered. "If the Zarin won't fight them, how long before they reach us?" "Not long," Alara said. She pointed at a sector near Zarin space. "This is where they will strike next." Ethan frowned. "How do you know?" Alara hesitated before answering. "Because my father does not consider this region important. He won't send reinforcements." The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. The planets in that sector, small human and Zarin colonies, would be left defenseless. Ethan clenched his fists. "We can't just let those people die." Admiral Reeves stepped forward. "We won't. We're sending a strike team. Small, fast, and efficient. We hit the Vrak before they expect us." Ethan looked at Alara. "You in?" She didn't hesitate. "Always." The mission begins. The next day, the strike team boarded a stealth-class human warship. It wasn't large, but it was built for speed and surprise attacks. As Alara strapped into her seat, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Ethan sat beside her, checking his weapons. "Nervous?" She smirked. "Are you?" He laughed. "Not with you watching my back." The ship's engines roared to life, and within moments, they launched into hyperspace. Their mission was clear: stop the Vrak before they could destroy innocent lives. And for the first time, Alara wasn't just running from her past. She was fighting for the future. The stars stretched into bright streaks as the stealth-class warship traveled through hyperspace. The ship was small but fast, designed for quick strikes and silent infiltration. Inside, the team of human soldiers prepared for battle. Alara sat beside Ethan, checking her weapons. She had chosen a Zarin plasma blade and a human-built energy rifle, combining the best of both worlds. Ethan smirked, getting used to human tech. She nodded. "It's less advanced than Zarin weapons, but practical, simple, effective. Just like us," he said, securing his armor. "We don't always have the best tech, but we make things work." The ship's communicator crackled to life. Admiral Reeves' voice came through. "Team, we have confirmation. The Vrak are attacking the small colony on Asteron 5. Civilians are trapped, and the Zerrin have refused to send aid. You're the only ones who can stop this. Ethan exchanged a glance with Alara. They had expected this. Alara clenched her fists. Then we won't let them fight alone. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, and the battlefield came into view. Asteron 5 was a small mining colony, its surface covered in rocky terrain and metal structures. But now, it was a war zone. Black, insect-like Vrak warships swarmed above the colony, firing plasma cannons at the buildings below. Explosions shook the ground as terrified civilians ran for cover. Human and Zerrin survivors were fighting back, but they were outnumbered. Their weapons barely scratched the Vrak's bioarmor. Ethan's voice was firm. "All right, team. We go in fast, hit them hard, and get those people out." The warship dodged enemy fire and swooped down toward the colony. The back doors slid open, revealing the battlefield below. Alara took a deep breath. This was it. "Let's move," Ethan shouted. Then they jumped into battle. Chaos on the ground. Alara landed smoothly, rolling to her feet as blaster fire rained down. The air smelled of smoke and burning metal. The Vrak warriors were even more terrifying up close. Tall, insect-like creatures with black kitten armor and razor-sharp claws. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the newcomers, and they let out a screeching battle cry. Ethan fired first, his rifle blasting through a Vrak soldier's chest. The creature shrieked and collapsed. Alara ignited her plasma blade, its blue energy humming in the chaos. A Vrak lunged at her, but she sidestepped, slicing through its armored exoskeleton. More of the creatures swarmed toward them. "We need to hold this position," Ethan called out. Alara turned toward the civilians hiding behind a wrecked transport ship. Among them were Zerrin survivors, their golden eyes filled with fear. One of them, a young Zerrin soldier, gasped when he saw Alara. "Princess." Alara nodded, but didn't stop moving. "Get the wounded onto the transport. We're getting you out of here." The young soldier hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The humans and Zerrin survivors worked together, pulling the injured to safety while the strike team held the enemy back. Then, the ground trembled. A massive Vrak war beast emerged from the smoke, its 6 legs pounding the ground as it let out a deafening roar. Its armored body was covered in thick black plating, and its claws gleamed like curved blades. Ethan cursed. "That thing is going to tear through everything." Alara's mind raced. Normal weapons wouldn't pierce its armor. They needed something stronger. She turned to the young Zerrin soldier. "Do you still have plasma charges?" He nodded, pulling out small, glowing explosives. Alara grabbed them. "Cover me." Before Ethan could stop her, she ran straight toward the war beast. A deadly gamble. The beast roared and swiped at Alara, barely missing her as she rolled under its massive legs. She ignited her plasma blade and leaped onto its back, gripping its thick exoskeleton. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to shake her off. "Alara," Ethan shouted. She didn't answer. She climbed higher, reaching the base of its skull, the one weak spot in its armor. With one swift motion, she jammed the plasma charges into a crack between its plates. The beast let out a shriek of rage. Alara jumped off, rolling as she hit the ground. "Ethan, now," she shouted. Ethan raised his rifle and shot the charges. A massive explosion ripped through the air, sending flames and debris flying. The war beast let out a final screech before collapsing, its body crumbling into the dirt. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a cheer erupted from the soldiers and civilians. The Vrak forces, now leaderless, began retreating into the shadows. The battle was won. A new beginning. An hour later, the survivors were safely aboard the transport ships, heading toward United Earth space. Alara sat beside Ethan, her hands still shaking from the fight. Ethan nudged her. "Not bad, Princess." She exhaled, giving a small smile. Not bad yourself. Admiral Reeves' voice came through the communicator. Good work, team. But this war is far from over. Alara looked at the distant stars, knowing he was right. The Vrak were still out there. And the real war was just beginning. The stars stretched endlessly as the United Earth Fleet and the Zarin survivors prepared for battle. The victory at Asteron 5 had been only the beginning. The Vrak forces were regrouping, and this time they were bringing their full strength. Alara stood on the bridge of the human flagship, the UES Valor, alongside Admiral Reeves and Ethan. The ship's massive windows showed the growing fleet, human warships and Zarin defectors, standing together against a common enemy. Alara's father, King Zarin Aex, had refused to fight. But she wouldn't abandon these people. She was no longer just a princess. She was a warrior, and this was her fight. Enemy fleet approaching, the communications officer announced. They'll be in range in 5 minutes. Admiral Reeves nodded. Then let's give them a fight they won't forget. The battle begins. As the Vrak fleet came into view, the space around them turned into chaos. The enemy ships were dark and insect-like, moving in eerie, coordinated patterns. Their organic armor absorbed most energy blasts, making them difficult to destroy. The first wave of Vrak ships opened fire, sending streaks of green plasma toward the human Zarin fleet. The Valor shook as the shields absorbed the impact. Return fire, Reeves commanded. The human ships launched a counterattack, their railguns and plasma cannons lighting up the void. The Zarin defectors, led by Alara's allies, unleashed precision strikes on weak points in the enemy formation. Explosions bloomed in space as ships on both sides were destroyed. The battle had begun. A desperate plan. Ethan gripped the console, watching the battle unfold. We're holding for now, but they outnumber us 3-1. Alara's golden eyes narrowed. Then we need to change the rules. She pulled up a holographic map of the battlefield, pointing to a massive Vrak command ship at the center of the fleet. That's their leader, she said. The Hive commander. If we take it down, the rest will lose coordination. Admiral Reeves frowned. That ship's armor is too strong for our weapons. Alara smirked. Not if we get inside. Ethan immediately understood. You're suggesting a boarding mission. She nodded. We land on the command ship, destroy it from within, and cripple their entire fleet. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Ethan grinned. I like risky. Infiltrating the command ship. A small strike team, including Alara and Ethan, launched in a stealth shuttle. They weaved through the chaotic battlefield, dodging enemy fire as they approached the massive Vrak command ship. Almost there, Ethan muttered, gripping his rifle. The ship's organic hull loomed ahead, pulsing with a sickly green light. As the shuttle latched onto its surface, the team cut through the outer layers, breaking into the ship's dark, twisting corridors. The inside was alive, walls pulsing like a breathing organism, strange fluids dripping from the ceiling. The team moved carefully, weapons ready. Alara's voice was steady. We find the core and destroy it. They pushed forward, battling through waves of Vrak warriors. The creatures screeched as they attacked, but Alara and Ethan fought side by side, cutting them down with precise strikes. Finally, they reached the heart of the ship, a massive glowing structure pulsing with energy. This is it, Ethan said. We plant the charges here. Alara set the explosives, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. Timer set. We have 3 minutes. Just then, a deafening roar shook the chamber. The Hive commander emerged, a towering Vrak creature with 6 massive limbs and gleaming red eyes. It was faster, stronger, and deadlier than anything they had faced. Ethan raised his rifle. You just had to make this interesting. The Hive commander lunged. The final fight. Alara dodged as razor-sharp claws slashed toward her. Ethan fired at its weak spots, but the creature barely flinched. They had to outthink it. Alara spotted exposed nerve clusters along its back. "Aim for the nerves," she shouted. Ithan rolled under its attack and fired a direct shot. The creature roared in pain, its body twitching. Alara used the opening, leaping onto its back and driving her plasma blade deep into its skull. The hive commander let out a final, piercing shriek, then collapsed. Alara jumped down, breathing heavily. Ithan glanced at the explosives. Time to go. The team rushed back to the shuttle, sprinting through the collapsing corridors as the ship's core overloaded. Just as they escaped, the command ship erupted in a massive explosion, sending shockwaves through space. Victory and a new future. On the Valor's bridge, Admiral Reeves watched as the Vrock fleet fell into chaos. Without their commander, they lost ordination. The human Zerine fleet pushed forward, destroying the remaining Vrock ships. Cheers erupted across the fleet. Alara and Ithan returned to the bridge, battered but victorious. Reeves turned to them with a rare smile. "You just saved the galaxy." Alara exhaled, looking out at the stars. The war wasn't over, but today they had won. She turned to Ithan, a small smile on her lips. "So, what's next?" Ithan grinned. "How about we rebuild the universe, together?" Alara nodded. She had once been a princess, bound by duty. But now, she was something more, a warrior, a hero, and a part of something greater. And as long as she fought beside her new family, the future was worth fighting for.